Hello viewers, welcome to QTP functional testing videos. Myself Uday. In this video, I would like to demonstrate to you about what are the different object repository types available in QTP. There are so many other concepts or functionalities that are associated with object repositories, but I'm not going to cover all of those things. But I'm mainly concentrating on different types of object repositories existing in QTP. Okay, so uh, before proceeding further, let me show you some example. Okay, so where I am recording a small session. Okay, I will show you what is the local object repository and what is shared object repository, so that you will get a clear understanding of the remaining points which I am going to demonstrate. Okay, so for this, what I'm trying to do here is I'm just recording a small session. Okay, for that, what I'm doing here is I use flight reservation application, where I am logging into flight reservation application. Enter the username as Mercury, the password is Mercury. Okay, just click on OK. So after some time, flight reservation application will come up. After that, I'm just clicking on file. I'm just opening any already existing order. For that, you can give you can choose any of these three options. I'm just giving an order number, say 1. Okay, upon clicking on 1, it will show you the flight reservation order number. Okay, so once I stop my execution, okay, so if you would like to execute this test, let's see whether it is able to execute or whether it is able to perform the same operations or not. Okay, let me run this. Login pass. After that, it opened the order number 1, right? So here my point here is, like, if you execute this script tomorrow, or even after 1 week, or even after 1 month, or even after 1 year also, it will execute in the same manner, right? But how exactly, how exactly QTP is able to do the same operation, where exactly, how it is able to identify the objects, right? So whenever I recorded my operations in the application, what it did is it which stored all the objects and its properties in a in its own memory kind of thing, like, in its like how we generally remember any specific object. Once you identify any specific object, that we store it in our mind, right? So whenever we have to refer that object, which first should strike to our mind, so that we can able to perform any operation, right? In the same way, while recording, what it will do is it will identify that object and stores in its mind. Okay, so that is something like a non-technical term, but which is nothing but a warehouse of objects called object repository. Okay, all object information, like, whatever the operation that we performed on the application, it stores those objects in its memory, or a kind of mind called object repository. Let's see where exactly we can find this object repository. As you can see, this icon represents the object repository, or else you can directly go to resources and choose object repository. Okay, so when you record it, what it has done is, like, it stores all these objects in its memory. Okay, in its memory, in the sense object repository. For example, this is the login dialog. Okay, for this login dialog, it stores with these properties. This object is got saved with these properties. In the same way, OK button. So how exactly it stored this OK button with these properties? Okay, it stores this OK object. uh, what are the properties, how exactly why only these properties are used, then all these are covered in my object identification videos, where you can refer, like how to configure these properties. Okay, just watch those videos, like what and all the properties, how can we configure this object identification and all, in my object identification videos, right? So once it stores these objects in object repository, okay, upon executing it, what it will do, it will, so see, all these objects are stored in my object repository, right? So once I start executing it, what it will do, this is my base application base state, right? When I start executing it, what it will do is, it will first see dialog object. Okay, it will, when this statement got executed, it will refer to the dialog, see dialog object in my object repository. It will go to object repository, it will see login object. So with these properties, it will try to find the object. So this is the actual application object, right? So with this description, whatever the description properties I'm highlighting here, it will find to try, it tries to find an object in the application with these properties. If it able to find that object, whatever the operation, like at this moment the operation is activate, so it will perform that operation. Okay, once it identifies this object, it will perform the whatever the action associated with that object, right? So see, I'm clicking Fn, see this got activated. After that, what I am trying to do, in this dialog object we have a web element, web edit called agent name, right? This is the agent name text box. Okay, so first it will identify this dialog box. In that dialog box we have a winedit called agent name. So again it goes to this object repository, and it will see what are the description. This is the description for this agent name winedit, right? So it will try to find an exact match with this description in the application. Okay, when it finds that object, what it is trying to do, we are setting some value. Okay, that is called, we are trying to set a value called mercury. Did you guys observe this? So mercury got entered here, like that. So even if you execute the same step after 1 year also, it will work. Okay, so whatever the objects we are trying, like we are recording or we are adding, those objects will be stored in its memory called object repository. As you can see, all these are the different objects. Okay, so the object that we are referring here are called local object repository. Okay, so for example, say there is another approach called another object repository called shared object repository. So we will see the differences all in in a few minutes. But what is exactly is the shared object repository is nothing but uh, like whatever the all the objects which I am going to work on, I will save all those objects into a single file. Okay, for example, for that what I am trying to do, okay, let me create a new test. Okay, I will show you how exactly we can create a shared object repository now. Okay, just click on add, click on any of these objects, because I would like to store all the objects available in dialog box. So I am just selecting dialog, click on OK, and I want to use all object types. If you choose selected object only, then it will add only that we need. But I choose the dialog box and I want to include all the child objects existing in the dialog. So when I click on OK, what it will do, see all these are the different objects available in this dialog. Okay, so mercury, mercury, clicking on OK. So once this flight reservation come up, what I'm trying to do here is I would like to add all these objects also. So for that I'm just clicking on this. I'm choosing Windows, mean to say main dialog box. Clicking on window, I'm choosing all the object types I want to add. So these are the all the different types of objects and object types available in flight reservation window. So all these objects got added to this object repository. Okay, so if you are like if you want to associate these objects only with the associated action, you just, this is called local object repository, and these objects will be associated to the your current action only. Okay, but if you want to if you want all these objects into different actions in different tests, then you have to create a shared object repository. For that, what you need to do is you just click on file, export local objects. Okay, so when you export it, what it will do is like mm, okay, so I am just like flight reservation objects. Okay, so what it will do here is all these objects, whatever the objects that are there in this repository at this moment, will be stored in a separate file called shared object repository. Okay, so now how can we like access that repository? Say for example, say I'm creating a new test. Okay, I would like to use some of those objects. How can we do that? Just directly go, we need to associate that shared object repository to my test. Okay, how can we do that? Just go to file menu, click on setting. Okay, where you need to just click on resources. One second, sorry, my bad. Just go to edit, action, properties, associate repositories, choose flag, go to here, and this is my light reservation shared object repository. Once I add, it will ask you like, do you want to create a relative path for that path? I just say okay. Okay, then I'm just clicking on okay. So now once you click on object repository, all the objects, like all the objects which are associated with this shared object repository are associated to this test. Okay, so once this is associated, you can use for like whatever the objects existing in here, right? As you can see, window, like I would like to, okay, first is dialog, right? So dialog, dialog, login dot, in that what I have, win edit, I have an agent name. Okay, like whatever the scripting that you want to have write, you can do those operations here. Okay, once you associate the shared object repository, then you can, on those objects are available in this object repository. Okay, and you can write whatever the script that you want. Okay, so am I missing some anything here? So once you click on object repository, see, as you can see, all these objects are read-only mode. Okay, you cannot editing anything in here. So shared object repositories cannot be edited in object repository. There is a separate option for that, that is called object repository manager, where you need to choose the shared object repository and can update the shared object. That I will be updating and merging operations, comparison operations, and all those modifications I will be covering in my next videos. Okay, so I think you might have got an overview of what is local object repository and shared object repository. I am going to my presentation. So these are the two types of object repositories. One is local object repository and shared object repository. A shared object repository stores objects in a file that can be accessed by multiple tests. It is in a read-only mode. Okay, so a local object repository stores objects in a file that is associated with one specific action so that only that action can access the stored object. So to give more clarity, what I'm doing is that I'm putting it in a representation. Okay, say I have three tests: test 1, test 2, test 3. Okay, and each test have say three actions: action 1, action 2, action 3. Okay, each of these three tests will have these actions. Okay, in my first action what I am doing is I am using object 1, object 2, object 3. In test 2 I am using object 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, and in my action 3 I am using object A, object 2 and object 3. Okay, so even though as you can see object 2 is existing here and object 2 is also existing in action 1, so these two are considered as different objects. These two objects are different objects. Okay, for example, if you have done any modification here, okay, in action 1, it doesn't have any impact. It mean to say whatever the values it is updated here may not be should not be reflected in my action 3 because these two considered as a different object. Okay, so like that, for example, see, as you can see the same, like for example, this object 1 is existing in test 1 action 1, and at the same time it is existing in test 2 action 1 and in test 3 action 1 and is even in test 3 action 3. Okay, so because in local object repository which are associated only to the specific action, these will be considered as a different objects. Okay, any updation that you do, if you have done in one action will have no impact in the other object. Okay, so this is the representation for the shared object repository. What we will have is, so all, like I put some of the objects in one object repository and some sort of, like based on the application I put all these objects into different object repository. I will associate these two repositories to my test. Okay, so all the actions can use the same object. For example, in this action 1 uses object 1, action 3 will also refer if we use the object 1 only, then it will refer the same object. Okay, for example, if I have done any change in here, the same object will be reflected for both of these actions, not only in the same test, even across the multiple tests as well. For example, what I am trying to say here is, say in my test 1 action 1 I am using this object 1, and in test 3 action 1 I am using the same object, and test 3 action 3 also I am using the same object. Okay, for example, if I change the object description here, then the changes will be impacted to the rest of the actions where I am referring this object. Okay, whereas in my local object repository that is not the case. If you have done any changes in here, that will be impacted to that action only. Okay, because it will consider the, even if the object is same, it will be considered it as a different object. Okay, I think so far you are clear, and this is how the shared object repositories. So whatever the shared object repositories are there, you need to associate those shared object repositories to the respective tests. Okay, so these are the differences between the local object repository and shared object repository. So object is available only to that action, objects available for multiple actions. So what I am trying to say here is, this object 1 in here is will be accessible for this action only. Whereas if you go to shared object repository, this object one can be accessible to all the different tests wherever, like once we associate these shared object repositories to any of the tests, so for those tests this object will be available. Second one, uh, another difference is, like for example, if you are new to QTP, then people will go for local object repository. But if you have well versed with QTP, or in many organizations, what they will do is they will use the shared object repository. Like in each and every page, they will add all the objects in the application and store it in a shared object repository. Okay, all the different test engineers associate that shared object repository and will write their own scripting. Okay, and in the third difference is, if you have very very few tests, your test suite may contain very few tests. Okay, at that time better you go for local object repository. Okay, whereas if your test should have lot of automation, you need to create lot like huge number of tests, then better to go for shared object repository. Okay, and fourth difference is, where um here I would like to mention one point here. In some of the projects, what they will do is, during design time, during the application development itself, there is a mutual understanding between the developers and testers, where they will give the all the object identification while developing itself, right? For example, like unique properties like HTML ID, whatever it is. Okay, IDs, or these properties will not change at all. Okay, there will be a very minimal chances of changing these object descriptions. Okay, during those kind of projects, better to go for local object repository. But there are projects where the developers will change the objects very frequently. Okay, during that time, what you better you go for shared object repository. In terms, like for example, say, as I explained you earlier, for example, this object is there. If it has to be, if it got to change, what you need to do, you need to open each and every test, each and every action, and you need to update in all the places where you have this object. With this example, right, how I can, like, how many references are there for object one? We have one here, another one here, and we have another one here, and we have another one here. We have four instances of this object one. If the object got changed, I need to open all these tests and all these actions and need to update the object, right? Whereas if you go, if you are using a shared object repository, what you need to update in a single place, right? That is the difference. So you expect object changes are very frequent. Okay, so which is very easy, right? And if you are using shared object repository, it is very easy to update, because you need to update in a single place. Whereas if you are using local object repository, you need to update in all the instances. Okay, so what I am coming here is, object changes made in one local object repository will not change the object in another local object repository, which I mentioned earlier. You need to update the object in all actions wherever it is used. Okay, local object repository is editable in OR, like which I showed you earlier. Okay, this one is shared up because I associated here, right? So all these are read-only in nature. But if I use a, local object repository, then they can be editable there itself. Like, see, what I am trying to say here is, if I record this session, okay, I am recording it. So flight reservation file, open order. So I'm doing one. Stop recording. See, yeah, so at this moment the object, by default the objects are added to the local object repository. If I would like to add anything, I can add it here itself. Okay, but if you are using a shared object repository, that cannot be possible because the object repository will be in read only mode. Okay, so local object repository is editable in object repository, whereas shared object repository is read only in object repository but can be editable in object repository manager. There is another tool which is existing in QTP, like we have to use object repository manager, where we need to give the shared object repository path. After that we can edit the shared object repository objects. When you save a test, all object repositories are saved with a test. Local object repository is not accessible as a separate file for editing. So what I am trying to say here is, if you have multiple actions, say action 1, action 2, action 3, like this, so each object repository associated to the respective actions. Okay, whereas in shared object repository we have a single file. Okay, shared object repositories can be saved as a separate file and can be associated to entities. Local object repositories file have an extension called d bdb extension, whereas shared object repositories files have an extension called tsr extension. Okay, so these are some of the differences between local object repository and shared object repository. Kind of like, advantages and disadvantages are there for both. Okay, for example, say as I can tell you here, right? See, if I go for local object repository, how many objects are existing here? As you can see, okay, 9 objects and 3 rows, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38 objects are there. Okay, but if you go for shared object repository, because there are like most, like, duplicate entries will be stored as a separate files, because the same object is stored in multiple times here. Okay, whereas if you go here, the same object will be stored in once here, right? If you see the size, and if you go for this approach, if you, like, compare the size, it is, we have 38 objects here. However, how many objects we have here? 9 plus 12, 21. Yes, like, if the test shoots growing up, like, if you have 50 or 100 tests, then you can see the size difference as well, right? So that is one of the difference. The size, like, if you compare the object repository sizes, then local object repositories have more size, whereas shared object repositories have a less size, because there will not have any duplication of the objects. Okay, so there are like few points that we need to remember. For example, if an object existing with the same name with both local object repository and shared object repository, let me show you something here. Like, I have, like, these objects in my object repository, right? So what I will do now here is, I will try to associate the shared object repository. Now let's see. Say, so I have associated the shared object repository now. As you can see, all these objects, like, shared object repositories are added to my object repository, because at this moment we recorded from flight reservation only, right? So what it have is, all, like, these are local, right? Before I add to the shared object repository, these are open order and few other options got saved with my tests, right? So those will be, as you can see, once I just click on it, open order, OK button and all, the repository type it chooses as a local, whereas the rest of the things came from the global. This is a shared object repository type, right? So where it will, even in the object repository window, if it comes from the shared object repository, it will show that repository name. If it is a local object, then it will show with the repository type as local. Okay, so during, if you associate like shared object repository, and at the same time if you have the local object repository, okay, so for example, say I have an object, as you can see from this picture, I have an object 1, object 2, object 3, object 4, 5 and 6. Okay, this is my shared object repository where I have 3 objects like 0, 1, 0, 5, 0, 6. This is a local object repository. Okay, but what I have is, because these two are separate object repositories, and there are chances that they may have a different description. As you can see, the description for O1 in shared object repositories, like name is submit, input type is submit, and HTML is like brn1234. Okay, whereas the same object have a different description in local object repository. Okay, where name is submit, where input type is button, HTML ID is brn1234. Okay, if there is a situation like this, even the name is same, right? The name, hierarchy and everything is same, but they have a different description. At that time, which description it has to choose? That is the point. So at that time, what it will do is QTP will go for local object repository description. Okay, it won't consider the description associated for the shared object repository. It will go for local object repository. That's what I mentioned here. So if an object exists with the same name with both local object repository and shared object repository with the same action, then local object identification is used. So it will go for this object description for identifying the object. And for example, as with my previous functionality, here I have, what I have is, both of them are shared object repositories. Okay, this one is associated first, after that this shared object repository is associated. Then how exactly, which one QTP will choose? So because this one is associated before this one, it will uses this description. Okay, if an object exists with the same name with more than one shared object repository, then the object description from the first occurrence of the associated shared object repositories, right? So whichever is associated first, or in this order, whichever is associated in first, that will be, so the object description existing in that shared object repository will be used. Okay, so that's all in this video. Okay, I will be covering more like merging of shared object repositories and comparison and all that stuff in my next videos. Okay, thanks for watching this video. Please leave your comments about this video. Thank you.